From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Empowering Seniors.
Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose. Today we have a brand new topic for you that's so empowering. We're talking about ADHD in unexpected places. Meet Jamie Shapiro. She has a podcast called Grandma Has ADHD, and she has some fascinating topics to share with us today. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. I'm so appreciative that you have me here. It's so innovative of you to bring this topic to your listeners.
Well, thank you. I love the idea of innovation and that it's not something that I've heard other people talking about. Mm-hmm. And I think the name of your podcast is so intriguing, Grandma Has ADHD, and it does cause you to kind of wonder. Mm-hmm. So how did you come across this theory?
Okay, so it's a story. I work as a senior move manager in San Diego, and I was in and out of people's homes and seeing how they lived. And then I ended up having my oldest child come to me and say that, now my child is non-binary, so I'm gonna use they, but at the time, girl, came to me and said, I think I have ADHD. And I said, you don't have ADHD. You've been reading since you were 3 years old. And I had a half brother who had ADHD, who had to be on Ritalin in the 80s because we thought of little boys as being the hyperactive kids with ADHD. We didn't even think that it existed in girls. And then they also thought that we would outgrow it. So fast forward, we're at the psychiatrist's office. He's asking questions. I'm answering questions on behalf of my child. And I looked at him and I said, I'm answering more yeses for me. Do I have ADHD? And he said, absolutely. And then it took another 8 years for me to connect the dots and realize that my mom had ADHD. And what was interesting about that is that my entire life, my mom has always had a lot of clutter. There was stuff everywhere and I could not fix the problem, and I kept trying to. I'd even hire professional organizers because that was before I got into the industry. And even when I would meet with senior clients who had a lot of clutter, I'd always say, don't even worry about it. I've seen it all before. My mom, and just try to put their minds at ease and reduce the shame. And I was listening to a podcast and about ADHD, and they said something about fibromyalgia and migraine headaches being very common in women with ADHD. And I thought, oh my gosh, my mom has migraine headaches and fibromyalgia. So I called my mom and I said, for years I'd been saying my mom had hoarding disorder. I said, Mom, I don't think you have hoarding disorder. I think you have ADHD. So my mom actually had been treated for anxiety and depression most of her life. She went to her doctor and her psychiatrist, and sure enough, she had ADHD.
So what did that diagnosis do for her in terms of changing maybe her perspective about herself and her habits?
That's a really good question. And I want to say, first of all, that I'm always asked, why did you start the Grandma Has ADHD podcast? Why does it matter? They've lived all of these years. And so what I would say to somebody is I would say, do you think that your life should stop, or that you should stop growing or knowing yourself better just because you turn 50 years old or 65 years old? Of course not. So I think when you understand that you have ADHD, you have a new lens of why you made the decisions, why you might have struggled with some of the things that you struggled with. And my mom struggled with clutter. She was always, collecting things or starting new craft projects, and then she'd lose interest and she'd move on to the next thing. For me, I was a mom with 3 children. I could not seem to get the schedule together. And there's a lot of, when you have ADHD, there's a lot of internal dialogue about why can't I get it together? What's wrong with me? And we tend to have more anxiety. We tend to have more social anxiety. So having that ADHD diagnosis, and by the way, we don't necessarily have to have a formal diagnosis as a senior, because the chances are that we're probably not going to be able to be medicated because we're treating other things. But to be able to put those habits in place that make life easier, it's really important. But it also explains about your relationship. So here, I'll give you a perfect example. My mom came to visit shortly after we realized that she had ADHD. And she came into town. So my mom lives in Florida, I'm in California. And 2 mornings in a row, my mom left her hearing aids at home. And I'm thinking, how could you not realize that you don't have your hearing aids in, right? And old me, prior to knowing my mom had ADHD, would have gotten very upset about it. And now I just know to plan for the time. But I have more forgiveness for my mom because now I understand, she's not trying to be, this is how her brain works.
Sounds like it gave you more of an understanding of your mom, more empathy. And so the idea of getting a diagnosis or some understanding that there might be some things going on, it's just part of your journey and understanding yourself better and having empathy for friends, family members, etc. And I think that understanding can make a big difference because there's so much conflict in your mind about things between spouses, between generations, friends, and when you understand the why behind it, that can really change relationships for the better, I would think.
Absolutely. I have to share, we both got our Certified Senior Advisor designation, and there are 6 books that we have to learn and read to take the test. And the first one was on sociology of aging. And there were a couple of things that really struck me. And one was the term gerotranscendence, which I love. And basically, Erik Erikson had the 8 stages of life. And when he got into his 80s, he and his wife started talking to their friends about where they were. And he came up with a 9th stage, which is called gerotranscendence. And, our entire life, we're sort of moving forward. But when we are, aging and we're sort of evaluating our lives and the decisions that we made. And, we are, taking that perspective of looking backwards. And I think having that understanding of ADHD and seeing how it played out into your lives, yeah, there is something about having that peace of mind. Like maybe I wasn't crazy. For instance, my mom didn't finish college, and my mom is brilliant, but she never had the ability to focus to be able to finish. And so being able to look back and at the decisions that you made now with an understanding. One of my favorite quotes about ADHD is there was a quote about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers about how Ginger Rogers had to do everything that Fred Astaire had to do, only she had to do it backwards and in heels. And that's sort of what I think of ADHD. Like our brains are just wired differently. So they want to put us into a classroom, they want us to conform, and we're creative and we don't think the same way. And I think it's also really important that we pay attention to the strengths and the wonderful gifts of ADHD. We tend to be more creative. We are able to problem solve and think of things in a very different way. The majority of entrepreneurs have ADHD. So rather than beating ourselves up about it, I think that self-acceptance and understanding. On my podcast, I interviewed Alan P. Brown, who is the ADD crusher. And he said that he was giving a talk on ADHD, and there was an 87-year-old man in his audience who said that he had been diagnosed at 80. He said the last 7 years had been the best 7 years of his life.
Wow, that's empowering.
It is. And after I've given the Grandma Has ADHD presentation, I had a woman come up to me and say, "You spoke to my soul."
Yeah, so you're really making a big difference. What do you think made it his best 7 years?
Well, again, I think when you understand yourself, one of the things that I love about my ADHD, and it's actually one of the things that they've said is really going to be great for seniors, is we have curiosity. We are naturally curious. And so what happened for me, we tend to have this thing called our hyperfixation. And I liken it to, the little boy that loves dinosaurs, and he can, you know what I'm talking about. He can tell you every single dinosaur and when it lived, because that is what he's really interested in. Well, ADHD, for a lot of people, when they discover that they have it, becomes their hyperfixation. And so, for instance, I hate small talk. It's the bane of my existence. I don't want to be bored. Somebody with ADHD, we want to have a real connection with somebody. We don't want to talk about the weather. And so when you understand this is how I am, there's this freedom, and it's just, and I will say that what I have discovered, that when someone finds out that they likely have had ADHD, hiding in plain sight their whole life, there's a mix of grief and relief. The relief is, this makes so much sense. And then there's this, what would my life have been like if I had known? How would I have made those different decisions? And I will say, from my relationship with my mother, recently she came to visit, and there was a lot of people with ADHD struggle with what's called rejection sensitive dysphoria. A lot of people don't like to use the word dysphoria, but that's still the term that's being used. And it tends to be that we take rejection, or we take a situation and we amplify it, or we ruminate, and we maybe make it bigger than it really is. And my mom was doing that in something that had occurred between the two of us. And I was able to step back and realize, I'm going to give my mom some grace. Old me, it would have started another war between us. So.
Rejection is already probably one of the hardest things to deal with as a human being. I think that's one of the most painful things, and I really ache for people that are estranged from family members, that you could see how this could all come into play.
That's actually one of the signs in seniors that we look for is, do you have estrangement in family relationships? Because we do tend to, and again, when you have no understanding, and then the reality is that ADHD is as heritable as height, which means that it is going to run in families. And so if you have a child or a grandchild with ADHD, the likelihood is either you or your spouse or one of your parents has ADHD.
Let's go back to the little boy with the fixation on dinosaurs.
Sure.
Or bugs, or memorizing all kinds of facts. Do you think it's always ADHD, or do you think it could, it's just something interesting?
So I know that it's also common in autism to have a hyperfixation. I can't speak to neurotypical. I've just learned that it is very common for somebody with ADHD. And I also want to bring something up. I've seen people that it is so clear to me that they have ADHD. It's just so there. And I will ask, and that's something that you have to bring up delicately, because one of the challenges and one of the reasons I'm so glad you had me here is that there's a stigma around it. And I'm really trying to reduce the stigma, because when we reduce the stigma, we can have conversation and we can get to know each other better. So I will see somebody that is clearly ADHD, and I remember there was a man, I was at a senior expo with him, and he was the MC of the event. He was in his 90s, by the way. That weekend he was going to be playing poker, playing pickleball, he was emceeing the event, and I was sitting next to him, and he had written all of these books. And I said, "Can I ask you a question? Do you have ADHD?" And he said to me, "I don't have ADHD. I can sit and write books, and my grandsons have ADHD, and I don't have that." And I was thinking, that's the misconception. If we are interested in something, we do focus on it. ADHD, they actually want to change it from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder to variable attention stimulus trait, because we can hyper-focus on something that interests us. And if it is our superpower, or that thing for us, everything else falls away and we knock it out. So if you want to write a book or read a book and that's what you want to do, you can get it done.
Wow, that is amazing. So it can be a hyper focus and lead to having a superpower, which is why over 50% of entrepreneurs may have ADHD.
Likely have. And by the way, speaking of percentages, they're not really certain. I've heard the numbers between 5 and 10% of Americans, and if you think about who it took to to move and leave your country and have that kind of courage and curiosity to leave what you know to go to something that's unfamiliar, Americans. And what they're also saying is about 80% of people who have ADHD don't know they have ADHD.
So this could be behind a lot of challenges that people have had, and they've looked at it as a failing rather than just how their brain is wired.
And I want to bring up another issue. I've also heard of cases where it's been wrongly diagnosed as dementia. And because I'll give you some examples. When I stand up in front of an audience now, I will say, "You're going to see me lose words. My brain will just go. Or I can't think of I can describe it, but I can't come up with the word. And I have problems with short-term memory. So if I park my car, I have to be very mindful about, where I am and, getting into my body and not being in my head, because when you have ADHD, your brain's just constantly going. This is a great example, actually, I want to share with you. So I remember I was visiting a client in their home, and he was walking me around, and I was, kind of figuring out what was going to be needed to get the home ready for sale. And we go into the kitchen, and all of a sudden I'm like, And I realized I left my eggs on boiling to make egg salad. And I totally forgot and walked away from a gas stove. So I had to say to the client, I am so sorry. I just realized, I remembered that I left my gas stove on. And in my mind, I'm gonna come home to a house fire because of a gas stove, or the eggs are gonna have exploded and hit the ceiling. So I say now, by the way, that didn't happen, but I say to my senior clients, if you had done that, what would they have said about you?
Judge you for dementia.
Correct, immediately, oh, something. So what we need to do is we need to look at somebody at the age of 40 and see how they were acting at the age of 40. And that's how one of the ways that we distinguish, where is it cognitive impairment, and where is it ADHD? And I also want to share that it is typical for anyone who's aging, as you know, to have cognitive impairment. That's normal. And what I've learned too, and we learned this in our Certified Senior Advisor class, is that you can do the exact same thing when you have cognitive impairment when you're a senior. It just takes longer to do it. So for me, one of the best tools that I do is I now wear this watch. And when I boil eggs, I literally will say, set the timer for 10 minutes. So if you know that you're gonna forget, putting those tools in place is super helpful.
Wow, and so is that just like just a regular smartwatch?
Yes, just a regular smartwatch.
Okay.
And I can give you some other tips too that people, whether they have ADHD or just the cognitive impairment that comes with aging, the things that I've put into place, because I feel like in many ways I'm speaking the language of a senior.
More tips would be great. I also want to know more about, what do you mean by getting back into your body?
Oh, it's a great question. So, when you have ADHD, your head's always going, and you'll start going down the rabbit hole of thought. So a lot of times I'll be on the phone or I'll be distracted, I'm parking my car, and I go. And I don't stop and look around at my surroundings and oh, this is where I am. Let me kind of put myself here so that when I have to come back to it, because again, short-term memory is a real problem for ADHD.
And you can also take a photo of where you're at to remind yourself, but yeah. Could that be that that's the challenge for most people, that if they're distracted and they don't pay attention to where they park, that they might not remember?
Oh, for sure. And I want to say too, we're hearing more and more about ADHD, and I think that the screens have they're definitely causing some issues, not necessarily the ADHD that someone like I have. So the way that I grew up, I wasn't in front of a screen all the time. I could go out and play until the lights came on, right? But younger generations, they've got the constant stimulation of the screen, and so our brains are looking for that stimulation more than, older generations.
Okay, so when you see grandchildren on iPads all the time for entertainment, distraction, they're getting those, is it dopamine hits?
Right, it's getting dopamine. And they have figured out how to keep people engaged, how to keep them playing the games, how to keep them. So, I will say this, and I know that when you're a grandparent, there's this balance of, I don't want to, come in and be too intrusive, but there's a book that I read recently called The Anxious Generation, and it's talking about why so many kids right now are challenged with anxiety and other mental health issues. And he's a big advocate for children not having those screens. And I would just say, he compares it to, would you let a child go into on another planet that we knew nothing about the long-term effects of living on that planet, and then just send them? And he said that's sort of what we're doing when we put those screens in front of children. So I
testing it on them, and we'll see what happens when they grow up, maybe.
Correct.
Okay, so there's a lot more anxiety today among younger generations, a lot more diagnosis of challenges. But the truth is that you're saying this neurodivergent behaviors have been around all along. We might be worsening them with some of the things that we're doing in culture today. That this neurodivergency has been here.
It has.
And so that's why I think it's such a provocative title, Grandma Has ADHD. And you're interviewing such interesting people and really digging in on that subject.
You said that the neurodivergence has been around, so I love this meme. I don't remember, I'm sure I saw it on Facebook, but it was, no, your grandfather wasn't autistic, he just ate the same meal every day and collected clocks. right? You know, we saw the quirky behavior, we just didn't have a label for it. But it has existed. And, you know, I knew that my father had ADHD, so my grandparents had a video camera in 1945. And they literally have a picture of my father in his carriage, like constantly moving. And as I shared with you, my half-brother, we share a father, he had to be put on Ritalin. So again, we thought of the little boys with ADHD, and then, you know, I could see it in my dad. And my dad, who is just turned 80, has more energy and can do more physically than I can at 55. But we didn't recognize it in women, and we didn't recognize it in little girls. And had I not gotten diagnosed when my child was diagnosed, and I was 45, you know, I wouldn't have realized that I had it. So the reason that I named the podcast Grandma is that we could see it more in boys. And by the way, you can have a boy who is inattentive. So there are 3 types of ADHD. There's inattentive, which is, you know, you're constantly daydreaming, or you're doodling, or you're fidgeting, but you can sit still. So, and also we tend to be more emotional, but you can sit still. So you're not a behavior issue, so you're not going to get called to the principal. Then you have the little boy who can't sit in his seat, and everybody knows, oh, that's the ADHD boy. And then you have combined type. And actually that is what I am. My mother is inattentive. My father is hyperactive, and I get the blessing of both, which is actually a gift because I have more energy than most 55-year-olds. I think I'm aging really well. There's a magnetism of people that have ADHD. We tend to be the life of the party. We think really well on our feet, so we're super funny. You know.
Interesting people.
Yes.
Interesting people that have a lot of thoughts, have a lot of creativity, have gathered lots of information, so it can be intriguing.
Right. They think the best inventors, you know, have had ADHD. Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, you know, when they're looking back. As an aside, one of my one of the best influencers is Penn Holderness. You can find him on YouTube. I don't know if you want it, but if you go on and you Google Penn Holderness and ADHD, you know, it makes you feel better about it. And I also say, you know, community and connection is important for anybody. We definitely found this out during COVID, but it's especially important for people with ADHD to find their tribe, to find people who will accept them. And I'm actually in the process of becoming an ADHD coach. And so I'm with a bunch of other people who have ADHD, and we just laugh so much. And it's so nice to have that community. And this was a great one that I learned. We were talking one day, and it turns out that a lot of people with ADHD struggle with technology. Well, and that's whether they're young or old. And I'm going to go on a tangent because I loved this quote. They said that people who are, you know, Gen X and older, we are technology tourists because we did not grow up in that place. But our children, the millennials and the Gen Zs and beyond, they're technical natives. This is the land that they've known. So we're going to leave that there. But if you have ADHD, what happens is I don't want to read the instructions. I want to plug it in and have it go. So what happens when you plug something in, you don't read the instructions, you're going to inevitably have a challenge because maybe you're not rebooting it. Maybe you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So it's interesting that it doesn't cause technology problems, but it's because we jump from thing to thing and we don't take the time to read the instructions.
So that's interesting. And I've had lots of conversations over the years, the people that read the instructions and the people that don't, and it's just a different way that you're built. And sometimes people that don't read the instructions, even though they might have challenges, sometimes those are really the go-getters and the action takers. Well, sometimes people wait too long and they don't take action on things. And so
now you're going to filter at ADHD and not ADHD. I definitely want to leave your listeners with some tips, again, whether they are ADHD or not, some of the best tools that I've put into place. For instance, I set myself up for future Jamie. So for instance, I know in the morning a lot of us with ADHD, we have what's called time blindness. So we don't always predict how long something's going to take us to do or what's going to come up for us. And so when I get myself ready for future Jamie, I will get everything into the car that I can get into the car so that the next morning, if something does happen, I'm set to go and I haven't thrown off my day. And then giving myself a more buffer of time. I find I don't like to get somewhere early and then have 10 minutes. That's, I don't want to waste any time. But, either finding an activity that we enjoy doing in those 10 minutes or, but really building that time in. And sometimes I'll rush against the clock and think, okay, what can I do in those 10 minutes? And so just really giving myself that time to breathe. And meditation is also super, super important. And pausing. I know when you have ADHD, a lot of times you want to jump from thing to thing to thing. So a perfect example of my total ADHD is I was in Tulsa, and I was going to be coming here to do your show, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, I can't sleep, which stupidly I turn on the television. That's a whole other conversation, because sleep is critical for our brains and for staving off dementia, and it's especially important for people who have ADHD. But I turn the TV on, and they say something about hail and tornadoes. And I go into panic mode, because I know I have to drive in a place that I'm not familiar with to go from Tulsa to Wichita. Thank you. Thinking that I'm going to Kansas City, which is a whole other conversation, right? And I immediately get dressed and I head to the airport. I never stop to think about the fact that the rental car place isn't going to be open. So now, 6 o'clock in the morning, I am paying the ADHD tax when I am sitting in the airport for 2 hours waiting for it to open, where if I had not jumped into action, I would have looked at the phone to see what time the rental car place opens. That's an example of, just going forward without pausing.
Very interesting. Jamie, thank you so much for bringing a brand new topic that's so important and helping people maybe connect the dots in their life, their behavior, and also with their loved ones. Such a delight. Thank you for making the trip to being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It's amazing. People want to dismiss seniors, and you're just doing amazing work.
Well, thank you for being here to help us do exactly that. And thank you for watching. If you have questions about this topic or anything else that we cover, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at 316-686-4500 or email us at empoweringseniors@kpts.org. I'm Katherine Ambrose, and I'll see you on the next Empowering Seniors.